NATO is supposed to protect us from Russia and China. And the Western military alliance has the upper hand when it comes to technology and production capabilities. However, NATO has been severely compromised from the beginning through espionage, and this could shift the power balance. The West never had more than a few high-level sources in the Soviet Union, and virtually all of them were caught. The communists always had many high-placed sources in the West, and only some of them were exposed, such as the Cambridge Five or the atomic spies. Even the British MI5 spy chief Hollis was under serious suspicion of having passed information to the USSR. Moles in the American FBI and CIA gave away scores of agents and missions. Right from the start, NATO was compromised. China became communist. There were strange problems during the Korean War. Vietnam was a failure. Every operation to send trained commandos into the USSR failed. When was the last decisive war of NATO? Iraq and Afghanistan were grotesque failures and enraged the Muslim world. Afghanistan is now ruled by the Taliban again, and Iraq is a mess. What kind of performance can you expect from NATO nowadays? Apparently, Hamas knew all kinds of Israeli secrets regarding the defense. You can expect a frantic search from moles, but the league might be with the British or the Americans. History has shown what damage a single mole like Kim Philby can cause. Over and over again did Britain cause some of the worst intelligence failures, and the Americans had to deal with the consequences. Intelligence and military professionals from both the UK and the US feared an even bigger mole than Philby or even Hollis, the MI5 director. Lord Louis Mountbatten from the royal family. Not only did his military role give him access to all kinds of secrets, he was close to the first Secretary General of NATO, Baron Ismay. The reigning monarch of Britain always had access to all of British intelligence reports and may have shared intel with Mountbatten. And someone like Mountbatten was theoretically able to install and or protect other moles. There are several categories of compromising information against Mountbatten. His homosexuality, his alleged pedophilia, his contacts with communists, and the secret correspondence he managed between the British nobility and their closest relatives in Germany. Operating the secret communications channels was a special role he inherited from Prince George, the Duke of Kent. Prince George was the son of King George V and Queen Mary. His brothers were Kings Edward VIII and George VI. The relationship extended not only to Germany but also to Denmark and Tsarist Russia. Prince George died in a plane accident in 1942. After his death, Mountbatten took over the secret channels to noble relatives in Germany during the Second World War, including Philip of Hessen, who had already joined the Nazi Party in 1930 and took on diplomatic tasks for Hitler. A shocking number of the high nobility were in the Nazi Party. Philip of Hessen was the son-in-law of the Italian king, and he undertook secret diplomacy with Benito Mussolini, who was confirmed to have worked for British intelligence in his early days. After the war, the British royal couple posed in countless television reports. But there was a tricky problem. The secret communications from the war period were not allowed to be made public. The American and British occupying troops could have captured such documents on German territory. This also included details about Rudolf Hesse's strange journey by plane to England and the Duke of Windsor's relationship with the Nazis. Lord Mountbatten appointed selected people to travel to Germany and take documents with them. One of them was Anthony Blunt, the traitor in the service of the Soviets. Blunt was supposed to obtain documents from the brother of the Prince of Hessen-Kassel at Friedrichshof Palace in the Taunus region. Another mission went to the Duke of Braunschweig. Even when Blunt was exposed as a Soviet spy, he was treated with kid gloves. The book War of the Windsors clearly states that the Soviets were able to blackmail the British royal family and their relatives. Louis Mountbatten's nephew was married to Queen Elizabeth II, who had access to all intelligence, received daily reports in a red leather box, and used to be ahead of all of her prime ministers. Even Winston Churchill chided Mountbatten over his expression of left-wing views. The Americans were more open in their criticism and also pointed at the mysterious Peter Murphy, who was always very close to Mountbatten, without holding any formal position in the staff. Murphy had been openly Marxist when they had first met in Cambridge, and he was regarded as a very promiscuous homosexual. Despite this security risk, he was allowed to be alongside Mountbatten in Southeast Asia, where ultimately the communists were able to take over China. Even more astounding, Murphy was close to members of the British Communist Party, such as Harry Pollitt, an unwavering supporter of Stalin. From 1933 until November 1939, Pollitt was in direct radio contact with Moscow as the code holder. From 1931, Olga Gray, an MI5 agent, infiltrated the party and was, for a time, Pollitt's personal secretary. In Operation Mask, agents were able to crack the code and decrypt radio messages between Moscow and some of its foreign parties, such as the British Communist Party. They revealed the Comintern's close supervision of the Communist Party in Britain and Pollitt, as well as the substantial financial support the Communist Party of Britain received from Moscow. Among other things, Pollitt was instructed to refute new leaks about a Stalinist purge. Even Louis Mountbatten's wife, Edwina, became more left-wing. The authors of the book War of the Windsors conclude virtually everything Mountbatten did after the war perfectly played into the hands of the Soviet Union, working against British and American interests. Many saw his handling of the British withdrawal of India as a blatant move to steer that vast country towards Russia. Churchill detested his disdain for the special relationship between Britain and the US. Mountbatten supported the communists in the Spanish Civil War, opposed Britain's involvement in the Suez Crisis, and advocated for nuclear disarmament. Professor John Desmond Bernal from Britain's Communist Party provided Mountbatten with contacts in the Soviet Union. Bernal wrote, "In thinking of Stalin as the greatest figure of contemporary history, we should not overlook the fact that he was at the same time a great scientist. His humanity always prevented him from becoming doctrinaire. Stalin's concern for men and women also found expression in his concern for the advancement of oppressed people and nationalities." In the early 1930s at Cambridge, Bernal was in the same circle as Blunt and Burgess. Commander Donald McCormick from the Royal Navy, who had served under Mountbatten, wrote about the obsession of Mountbatten with his royal connections in Germany and Russia, just as much as in Britain, and his almost grotesque vanity, which sometimes led him to believe that he could achieve far more in international politics than anyone else. Vanity and treachery go together. CIA sources complained that Mountbatten personally blocked investigations into the activities of a senior Royal Navy officer who was under suspicion of passing information to the Russians. In the mid-1950s, he was in secret contact with the Soviet Ministry of Defense. Captain Geoffrey Bennett alleged that Mountbatten had expressed his loyalty to the USSR in the correspondence. In 1956, as First Sea Lord, he was at the forefront of planning the British military intervention in the Suez Crisis. The main goal was to retake control over Egypt and prevent the region from falling under Russian influence. Mountbatten was against the whole operation, and the USSR was pre-warned early because of a leak. Despite all this, he gained more and more promotions. Ron Perks, Mountbatten's driver in Malta in 1948, claimed the nobleman regularly visited the Red House, an upscale gay brothel in Rabat used by naval officers. Royal Historical Society member Andrew Loney wrote that the United States FBI maintained files on Mountbatten's alleged homosexuality. Loney also interviewed several men who claimed to be in relationships with Mountbatten at the time. In 2019, files became public showing that the FBI knew about allegations that Mountbatten was homosexual and pedophile as early as the 1940s. The FBI file on Mountbatten began after he assumed the role of Supreme Allied Commander in Southeast Asia in 1944. The file describes Mountbatten and his wife Edwina as individuals of extremely low morals, and it includes a claim by American author Elizabeth Baroness Daisies that Mountbatten was known to be a homosexual and had a perversion for little boys. Norman Neild, Mountbatten's driver from 1942 to 1943, told the tabloid New Zealand Truth that he transported boys aged 8 to 12 to Mountbatten's official residence and was paid to keep quiet. Robin Bryans had also alleged to the Irish magazine Now that Mountbatten and Anthony Blunt, along with others, were part of a ring that took part in homosexual orgies and recruited first-year boys in public schools, such as Portora Royal School in Enniskillen. Former residents of Kincora Boys' Home in Belfast have claimed they were trafficked to Mountbatten at Classibon Castle, his home in Mullaghmore. In October of 2022, Arthur Smith, a former Kincora resident, waived his anonymity to make allegations of child abuse against Mountbatten. The allegations are part of a civil case against state authorities responsible for caring for children in Kincora. The claims are based on 3 decades of American intelligence files uncovered by biographer Andrew Loney as part of his research for his new book, The Mountbattens, Their Lives and Loves. King George VI, already in 1950, shared secret documents with Princess Elizabeth, the future queen who was only 23 years old at the time. Prime Minister Clement Attlee provided her with detailed notes from the cabinet, classified as top secret. She also received State Department documents. Her private secretary was Baron Martin Charteris, member of the Privy Council and decorated with the most elite medals. They were also familiar with each other that he wasn't even formally examined and approved for the position. He just got the job. His grandfather had already been a deputy lieutenant of the Crown. Martin served in military intelligence and worked closely with Maurice Oldfield, later head of MI6. In October 2012, the BBC current affairs program Panorama reported that Oldfield had been linked by Operation Midland and a Metropolitan Police informant to the Elm Guesthouse child abuse scandal, which allegedly involved senior MPs and security staff. The investigation ended without charges, and in 2017, Oldfield was acquitted of all allegations of child abuse at the Elm Guesthouse and elsewhere. Princess Elizabeth grew up with her cousin Margaret Rhodes, who worked for MI6. Elizabeth's father was very close to the services, and her uncle was directly involved in secret operations during the war. The royal family communicated with the political government via new encrypted telephones. Elizabeth was given the codename 2519. She fell in love with Prince Philip of the House of Mountbatten. His infamous uncle was Lord Louis Mountbatten, the Supreme Allied Commander in Southeast Asia. Although Philip came from the usual family circles, there was a PR problem. All 3 of his sisters had married German princes during the Nazi era. The domestic secret service MI5 had to provide special protection for the big wedding because the nobility had many enemies who tried to infiltrate the catering circles in the run-up to the big event. Elizabeth became significantly involved in Cold War matters. Every evening at 7 o'clock, she received a red leather-clad box containing top-secret diplomatic cables, cabinet meeting notes, and intelligence memos. The Queen also always received the first copy of the weekly summary from the secret services. Even in the event of war, she would have been able to access all information, no matter how secret, on the condition that the documents were burned after reading them. She was considered to be very neat in her handling of documents and returned all government papers that were not destroyed without any gaps. Who from her family she let read the documents is of course a secret. In the mornings, there were additional meetings at Buckingham Palace with diplomats, intelligence chiefs, high-ranking politicians, and military officers. Tuesday afternoons were reserved for secret meetings with the prime ministers. Philip had to be monitored at every turn because he pursued similar pastimes as his infamous uncle Louis Mountbatten. Elizabeth's second son, Andrew, Duke of York, later had a most embarrassing scandal with a young lady procured by Jeffrey Epstein. The royal family knew that Anthony Blunt was a KGB spy as early as 1948. Elizabeth was ahead of her own prime minister, Alec Douglas Home, on the matter. After the end of the Soviet Union, the royals played a crucial role in the new relations with Russia and Eastern Europe. Basically, the KGB was allowed to move assets into the City of London and other various tax havens. Brian Fall, the British ambassador to Moscow, orchestrated royal visits to signal support for Yeltsin. Francis Richards from the embassy, who later became head of GCHQ, was able to move anywhere in St. Petersburg and met with the mayor, a certain Vladimir Putin. Putin soon acquired a Tsar-era palace, and it is possible that he has some noble blood. In a recent book about the KGB and the money transfers to the City of London, the author Catherine Belton says that a high source confirmed a visit by a very young Putin to a Russian-born princess in Hessen who had married into the Metternich clan. British spies are crown servants. The first head of MI6, Mansfield Cumming, considered himself to be in the service of the king, not the prime minister. King George VI knew all the secrets during World War II, from the D-Day plans to the codebreakers at Bletchley Park. MI6 chief Stuart Mingus was the stepson of the king's equerry and perhaps the illegitimate child of a king. Queen Elizabeth made a former MI5 chief, Andrew Parker, Lord Chamberlain in the royal household in 2021. Britain is thoroughly compromised, and that means NATO is thoroughly compromised. You can expect to see significant intelligence failures in current and future military conflicts.